welcome, and thank you for coming. Real estate is going through a fundamental shift from a fixed cost per seat commodity to an experiential, differentiated. Real estate is going through a fundamental shift from a must-have. It's a mouthful. We'll clean it up. I think we're great, and I think we're preparing for the roadshow right now. Sorry. The universe had to release it. Just let the air out.
WeWork is garnering questions about its business model.
There are all kinds of things that just pop out as red flags in this.
It feels like it's valued as a tech company, but this is a real estate company.
The founder wanted total, complete control for life.
The company went from a $47 billion valuation to near bankruptcy in just 6 weeks.
The future of the company very uncertain at this point.
If you tell a 30-something male that he's Jesus Christ, he's inclined to believe you.
All right, welcome everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sand Hill Road. I'm super excited to have today with me the author of my new favorite book, Billion Dollar Loser, The Epic Rise and Fall of WeWork. So I'm really excited to have with me today Reeves Wiedeman, who's the author of this great book that I can really recommend everyone to buy physically. It's a real page turner, and I read it from cover to cover. So Reeves, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book and eager to talk more about it.
Let's jump right in with the person at the center of it all.
You're a real estate company wrapped in this sort of in this tech sheen.
So we're definitely not a real estate company. We are a community of creators. We create environment for entrepreneurs and freelancers. We leverage technology to connect people.
So I personally met Adam back in, I think it was 2017, TechCrunch Disrupt New York. I remember him, not being quite specific about how he would bring everything to fruition.
When you have a 40% business, when you have a margin, you can actually choose when to be profitable.
Right.
We like to hover around the EBITDA break even, and then we can choose when we want to move, where we want to move.
But I could remember walking away thinking that he was this sort of cult-like figure and that he had this ability to inspire people with his visionary words. And some would call it reality dilution field.
Hello, New York. Hello, WeWork. Hello, global citizens of this earth. You know what a global citizen of this earth is? It's a member of the We Generation. And a member of the We Generation does not discriminate with age, race, gender.
You met him, I think, a couple of times while writing the book. Maybe talk about your experience with him personally.
Sure. Well, I actually only met Adam once. I met him in the spring of 2019. We met at his office in WeWork headquarters in Manhattan. And this was when WeWork was flying high. They were valued at $47 billion. They had not yet publicly announced that they were going to attempt an IPO. That would happen a few weeks after I met Adam. So in hindsight, everything was in the works, obviously, when I met him. He exuded incredible confidence, which is what you hear from everyone who meets him. And it sounds like kind of what you experienced as well. And he's just the kind of person who takes over a room.
Very charismatic from the moment I saw him. And he's very tall. And so he has a very commanding presence. And he's also really, really, he's really friendly.
Hello, how are you? This is our founder, Adam Neumann. We're shooting a movie. Hey, how are you?
You both want to be with him, and then I think it can kind of tell the ways in which he's sort of directing the conversation wherever he wants it to go, and that's a real skill, and he has that, and that served him well in conversations with reporters, with investors, with partners, with employees, with all kinds of people, and over the years as he built this company.
Your interaction with him at that meeting, he knew that you were sort of more on the fences with respect to your outlook for the company and that he was really trying to bring you around. I think that's something that sort of played out in a number of other relationships that he had, that he was really good at bringing people to his side and feeling that they were part of a bigger mission. Talk a little bit about the nuances of this interaction.
Yeah, Adam's the kind of person who you ask him a pointed question and he nods his head and tells you it's a great question and then says something else and doesn't quite answer it. And there's a way in which all of us do that. None of us want to answer the hard questions directly. And it is in some ways a real skill to sort of take a hard question and kind of divert it back towards sort of what your narrative is. If you're asking him, it is a bit unusual, Adam, that you are an investor in some of the properties that WeWork leases, for instance. We were just trying to prove our model kind of early in the days of WeWork. There's sort of nothing to see here. And he can kind of go off and sort of make his talking points. And he's very good at that. You could take that in a certain way and say, he's just pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. But I think, this is a real skill for any kind of person, no matter what it is you're selling.
You're on a very founder-friendly podcast here where we talk a lot about, building the first version of the product and obviously part of making it over the valley of death of every startup is sort of to fake it till you make it. But there's slippery slope in terms of how much confidence you portray and how much humility you have. Let's talk about the title of the book in the very beginning, which is $1 Billion Loser. And I think it's a controversial title because if you look at the numbers, Adam Neumann did quite well financially. He sold a bunch of secondaries in one of the crossover rounds. And also his early stage investors, top tier Silicon Valley firm Benchmark, they took out quite a substantial amount in secondaries. So on the face of it, he did deliver for both himself and his early stage investors, past the hot potato in a sense to the growth stage investors, which piled on. And it's often referred to as the MPO, the Masa private offering instead of the IPO. He went through the MPO and Benchmark as well. Talk to us a little bit about how we should understand the term loser in the context of your book.
Sure. Yeah. It's intentionally a bit inflammatory of a title. And there were sort of two meanings to it. Both are now a little bit off. One, this was a company that lost billions of dollars. I mean, that is one thing about WeWork and a handful of other companies, not many, over the past decade that got these huge infusions of cash, never before seen amounts of venture capital, not the seed rounds and the Series A, B, C rounds, but the Series F round, often coming from Softbank, whether it was to WeWork, to Uber, to some of the other companies that were just kind of burning cash. So that was one part of it. And then the other part was obviously at the time when Adam was pushed out of the company and the IPO collapsed, his total exit package was north of $1 billion. And he had done that despite the fact that by a pretty objective metric, the thing he had been building the company toward had failed. And that thing that he was building no longer seemed possible. And you're right, he came out great. Other investors, early investors, got a great return. They didn't get the return that they perhaps hoped for, but those weren't the people that got burned. I think when you think about some of the other people that got burned, the employees, many of whom lost their jobs, thousands of whom lost their jobs, almost all of whom did not get the financial windfall that Adam got and that Adam was promising them and promising them very publicly in events was coming very, very, very soon. And so, that's were kind of the two meanings. Of course, that has now shifted given that Adam's settlement with Softbank was more or less cut in half. So the paperback version of the book will be the $500 million loser, I suppose.
Yeah. One thing I found extremely interesting about your personal process in getting into the story. I remember back in 2019, you wrote this New York Magazine article, and there was this quote where you said, valuation and size today are much more based on our energy and spirituality than on multiples of revenue. And that's a quote from Adam. And I actually found a tweet of myself where I quoted this article, WeWork blurring the lines between dilution and delusion since 2010, because I was already quite bearish on it at that point. Talk to us a little bit about the personal writing process. It seems from me from the outside that you were dragged in more by coincidence as a journalist, and then it got so interesting that you felt there was so much material you had to turn it into a book. And you talked to, I think, more than 250 people who had been involved with the company. Talk to us about this process.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you. Yeah. As you allude to, this started with a magazine article. This started with in early 2019. I'm a writer at New York Magazine, and we decided We want to do a feature story on WeWork, frankly, because we had an office in Soho in New York at the time, and suddenly we were surrounded by half a dozen WeWorks. We saw this as a New York real estate story, as a story of this company that was clearly taking off and in many ways taking over the sort of commercial office space in New York City. And we knew some of the weirdness kind of around the company. We knew Adam was a bit of a quirky guy. We knew about the summer camp sort of bacchanal party every year.
Because of these company events. I mean, it is legitimately the craziest work experience you'll ever have in your life. I think at 4 o'clock they start serving alcohol. When I say they're serving alcohol, they are serving alcohol. Like every 50 yards, there's like a bar set up, and it's unlimited. Like if you wanted to drink for the end of time, you could have drank till the end of time. At all these events, during the day, you listen to presentations, speeches. There was always like some famous people there. And then, at night, you do the WeWork thing, which is kind of just party.
So we knew this was not just your typical company, but we did not see this as clearly this is a company that's going to be collapsing. I think, in fact, the opposite. We saw it as a company that was on the rise and trying to understand it. And so, when I published that story in June of 2019, the company was sort of preparing its IPO, and it was hard to get people to talk about the company, and that's the case with my job. And no matter what company I'm writing about, even people who have critical things to say are often reticent to do so for a variety of reasons. In the case of WeWork, some people were scared, which is a normal human response. You don't like talking about your employer for one reason or another, or your former employer even. And WeWork had shown in the past that they were willing to crack down on employees who talked to reporters and leaked to reporters. They had in fact sued one employee at one point for doing so. And there were also just employees who, would tell me, Adam's a little strange, and there's kind of weird stuff that's been going on, but I hope I get a payout soon, and so I don't want you to put any of this in an article. And there is that impulse from employees of hoping that things work out, even if kind of some of the things that they see don't quite sit right with them. So that article, I think was sort of appropriately critical and questioning of the company as it headed toward its IPO. And then I think as end of the summer emerged and the company's attention at an IPO came and very spectacularly collapsed, I think two things happened for me. One, it felt like the end of a story, and obviously WeWork is still a company and will still exist, and we can talk about sort of where the company is today. But the end of the Adam Neumann era had come, and to a certain extent, I felt like the end of a startup era had come. I have maybe different thoughts about how much this era has ended or not at this point. But I think I saw that sort of story kind of encapsulated with Adam's departure and the collapse of the IPO, and then people were just much more willing to talk. People were much more willing to share what had happened now that things had really gone south. So it just felt like an opportunity to kind of tell a bigger story than what had appeared in the magazine.
That's super interesting, because if I compare it to the process for Bad Blood and the Theranos story, I mean, Theranos was always super secretive about what they were doing and their internal operations. And with WeWork, it was the complete opposite. Like, it was always this sharing, this I mean, the name itself, I mean, the product, everybody could see that this is not a tech company, that this is a real estate company masquerading as a tech company, trying to get these SaaS multiples, and in their case, space as a service, as they termed it in the S1, an attempt to sort of get on these frothy tech valuations without actually having any tech angle.
Real estate usually is a very dependable, predictable business. It doesn't grow that much, but it's steady. You can kind of map out these returns. But WeWork was growing so fast that it was being valued by investors as an ultra-fast growth, low overhead technology company.
It wasn't Adam's first company. In fact, it was, I think, by all accounts, it was his third company. His first company was this baby clothing company.
He had this idea called crawlers, which was for babies so they could have padded knees. Babies have been doing fine for millions of years without padded knees.
Our tagline was, just because they don't tell you doesn't mean they don't hurt.
And then he had Green Desk. I think of it as sort of the first MVP of WeWork that that he managed to sell. And that was really this New York real estate story. And as you said, New York real estate is just not real estate. It's really this highly priced asset where if you run this arbitrage of long-term leases and short-term office spaces, you can get great multiples. And we've seen a number of people excelling in that, but it's a commercial real estate play. It's not a software play. Talk to us a little bit about this basic evolution, the basic business model. What were they offering?
Yeah, I mean, the offering was pretty simple. Nicely designed office space with free coffee and flexible lease terms. That was essentially the core of what WeWork sold. Beyond that, what they were telling people that they were selling, and that was both to investors and then to just the people who rented the space, was a sense of community, and that what you're getting is, you know, a place where your dog can come to the office. As you can see, my dog wandering the couch behind me. So this was somewhat novel, that your office should be fun, that it should be a place where you should meet people. And the company did put effort into this. It was not just a sort of kind of a buzzword that they threw on it. They did, especially early on, really try to get companies to meet each other. A lot of the early people were just solo entrepreneurs or 2 or 3 person design companies or whatever it might be. And so there was a real sense of community. And I think that was really strong for people. That became a lot harder to both sell and to kind of manufacture as the company grew. And that's what you had to do. You know, community wasn't going to grow naturally in a global office network with hundreds of thousands of people. Like community, you know, there has to be work put behind it. And I think at that scale, it was difficult to pull off. And you know, they aspired to kind of become this physical social network, as they put it.
This is WeWork, the world's first physical social network. Our mission is to empower the world through collaboration.
But it was difficult to kind of translate this sort of what works in a social network. And obviously we know all of the problems with digital social networks. It was difficult to actually translate that into the physical world in a way that could actually impact everyone who was working at WeWork.
Yeah, there are 2 angles I want to double click on. This tech angle that they were always trying to sell. And you outlined it really well in the book, that they were trying to build this social network, basically this LinkedIn with physical space.
They created this sort of Facebook type platform for members where you could get people connected through technology.
And in addition, I think they had some initiatives like putting sensors under the desks and sort of monitor where people would spend most of their time, sort of creating these heat maps and data analytics on, you know, how people behave within the office.
They had acquired a bunch of interesting technologies and were stitching together what might have been by far the most comprehensive tool for how people work.
We use beacon technology, but a lot of other aspects. We're using our video cameras to actually see where interactions are happening. And our entire process is built to make our members more successful.
But all of these were really marginal benefits that didn't really move the needle without a clear product vision and roadmap.
Yeah, you know, there were kind of 2 sides of it. There was kind of the physical social network, you know, trying to connect all of these offices and to build their sort of proprietary LinkedIn, kind of the way they thought about it. And they tried various attempts at that. Of course, whatever you think of LinkedIn, it's pretty good at what it is. It's a professional social network. And so there wasn't a clear utility to having sort of one that existed only within the WeWork universe. And then the other part was all these other ways in which they tried to make the sort of construction and operation of a building more tech forward. You know, they had some successes on this front. They did actually make the construction process more efficient and streamlined. They were doing all of this research. All of it's fine and well. You know, it's fine and well to like better learn how people use a conference room. But that isn't a 20 times revenue multiplier. You know, that's a minor efficiency. And so I think there was this sort of feeling and hope that one of these pieces of technology would actually elevate the company into that level. But there was just never quite able to sort of match what was promised.
And it always felt like the tech angle was added on top of the core offering. And that the reason why they passed through as a tech play was because a lot of their tenants were actually tech startups. And that gave the impression of them being part of the ecosystem. I remember in 2016, I went to so many meetups in the WeWork offices in San Francisco. And it was just really this kombucha on taps kind of feeling.
It says, do what you love.
Our friends who were doing their tech startups, they all worked in WeWorks. We didn't even consider any other co-working space. The thinking was if you have a tech startup and you want it to be successful, you start it at a WeWork.
I love co-working spaces so much. So let's start over here at the snacks area.
And everybody felt like they were in a tech space, but it was really just a tech space, and the tech happened somewhere else, and it was really decoupled from the physical location. To double click a bit on the community aspect, I mean, Adam, he grew up in a kibbutz in the south of Israel, and I take him seriously when he was saying that he was trying to build a community, and he was a great public speaker and local community builder. I think that was really one of his core talents.
You're a creator, and you're a creator, and I know you're a creator, and the reason we are all creators is because we do something that's greater than ourselves.
But community really isn't scalable in many ways. And I think part of the failure of WeWork is based on this false premise that this was scalable. What's your take on the community and cult aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge part of what the company was doing and what it sold. I think a huge part of what made it so appealing. And there's a way in which, early on when you're a small company, like you want to foster that. You want to foster in your employees a sort of real belief in what you're doing and a sense of fun and camaraderie and all of that. But it can get out of control. And I think, a lot of startup founders forget that their employees, they are looking for sort of a mission and a sense of kind of belief in what they're doing and a sense of fun and all of that. But they will never, the company will never sort of be wrapped up in their lives kind of as much as it will be for a founder. And that's just sort of the reality of this. And I think with WeWork, it got to a point where you can have a cult of 10 employees and maybe 50, but once you have 10,000, that doesn't work as more. It doesn't hold the center of a company anymore. And what holds the center is paying people well, making it a good job and a good place to work and allowing them to build a life. And WeWork was predicated on that. I mean, that's what they talked about, was building, building your life's work basically. And ultimately what a lot of employees found was that they were building Adam Neumann's life. They were building it for him. They were building his empire. And at a certain point, they began to realize, like, this isn't for me as much as I want it to be. And so I think there's both ways in which kind of pushing that is a good thing and can help a company grow, but it can also be kind of dangerous.
Yeah, I think you brought it out really well in your book, that the fact that there was so much grunt work involved and very few people realized this in these ambitious plans and also in the execution of opening up so many locations so quickly. And it was really grueling and hard construction. The wealth accumulation was really centered at the top, very top heavy organization, I would say. But let's talk a little bit about the VCs that enabled a lot of this. And it's quite interesting to see that WeWork had a similar funding journey as Uber, with Benchmark leading the Series A, and then very quickly crossover rounds, JPMorgan leading the B, and then it was Fidelity that led the E, and then obviously Masa came in with Softbank. And it's a typical pattern that we see. You have a strong signal investor at the A, and then you have the growth capital piling in the later rounds, trying to preempt the next round. But let's talk about Benchmark and the role there. And I'm a big fan of Bill Gurley. I know you brought it out well in the book that he was quite suspicious of the fast funding trajectory. One quote of him is saying that you have to play the game on the field. So basically you can't disregard these signals in the private markets. And I mean, his fund and firm has done financially well. I think they've realized a good DPI on that transaction, good realized multiple. If they look back, I heard a partner from NEA talking about this yesterday, actually, about Bill Gurley, because he's benefiting as a seed and Series A fund, obviously, from this dynamic.
They were the first institutional investor to get involved, the first big investor to get involved, rather. The money was important, but so was the brand, and so was the name Benchmark attached to WeWork. And intentionally or not, the narrative of WeWork as a tech company was fueled early on by Benchmark's involvement. A lot of the other funds that became involved later were more traditional investors, investors that invest in all kinds of things. Benchmark was the one that's what they do, and that's what they're known for, and that's what Bill Gurley is known for. And a few things. I do think Benchmark certainly made efforts to try to push WeWork in a more sensible direction, especially later on, and as SoftBank sort of came into the picture and pushed the company in different directions. But they also fed this growth. They invested at every round along the way. They knew Adam was kind of a crazy guy, and nothing in my book was a surprise to them. They sort of enabled it and encouraged it. If not encouraged it, then allowed it to happen, because the valuation kept going up. And even if it didn't totally make sense to them, then they were kind of willing to do it. And that you get to a breaking point at some point, which they of course did with Uber and eventually did with WeWork and with Adam. But there's collateral damage along the way. And as much as these sort of VC firms can present themselves as the adults in the room, it's still pretty rare for them to really put their foot down and make a company sort of act in a way they think is more sensible. And they did that eventually here, but there were points along the way where they could have done more had they wanted to.
It's really interesting because on the one hand, they might have, from a personal perspective, the incentive to say, well, better grow slow and grow real. But then they see all this dumb money moving in, and obviously they like the markups in the fund. They like they like realizations. They like secondaries, and the LPs like markups in their funds. So it's definitely a slippery slope for them. Let's move on to another really important stage of the company, which was the Series C, which was led by JPMorgan. You outlined this really well in the book, the relation with Jamie Dimon and Adam Neumann, another father figure to Adam Neumann before Masa moved in. Talk to us a little bit about this relationship, at least how you perceived it from the outside between the two men.
Yeah, I think for both Jamie Dimon and for others at JPMorgan, Adam looked up to them, and he, Adam, he was never setting out to become a tech founder, or benchmark was not really something that he cared about, or even knew that much about before they came in. Eventually, sort of, he embraced that role because that was the role you embraced if you were an entrepreneur. But Adam was just a businessman. He liked making deals, and that's what he did from the get-go at WeWork. And so I think that in that way, he was always kind of tuned to and interested in the world of banking, the world of finance, where deal making is core to what happens. And so this was a sort of crucial moment. It was a different kind of stamp of approval than benchmarks. It was that was Silicon Valley. This is kind of old Wall Street money believing in this as well. And I think that both of those sort of combined were crucial to the company's growth.
I think Benchmark really helped the company to be cemented as a tech company. When I met Adam Neumann at TechCrunch Disrupt in New York, he never felt techie. It wasn't what he was breathing, what he was, fantasizing about. He wanted to be a businessman. He wanted to be accepted and respected within Manhattan. And that stamp of approval was really what Jamie Dimon could provide with JPMorgan, I think. And then let's move on to the next round, the turnaround point in the story when this reality dilution field that Adam Neumann has built gets really legitimized in a sense with these absolutely outrageous valuations when Masa moves in with his $100 billion vision fund.
Adam has been preparing for this for weeks. And he's pacing around, watching his clock. 15 minutes goes by, no Masa. Half an hour goes by, no Masa. A full hour goes by, and he's still looking at his clock. Finally, Masa shows up, and he says, Adam, I'm so sorry. I'm late, but we only have 12 minutes. And they're going through WeWork, and he's giving him the super speed tour. At exactly 12 minutes, Masa's son looks at his watch, and he says, Adam, I'm so sorry, but I have to go. But Masa said, if you'd like, you can ride with me to my next meeting. So Adam grabs his iPad with the whole WeWork Softbank pitch, and they jump in the car. Adam pulls up his WeWork pitch, and Masa says, I don't need the pitch deck, let's just talk. Masa turns to Adam, and he says, Adam, let me ask you a question. In a fight, who wins, the smart guy or the crazy guy? And Adam says, the crazy guy. And he goes, you're right, but you're not crazy enough. You got to be the crazy one. You need to think bigger. You need to think 10 times bigger. And Masa begins, doodling his vision for WeWork, this grand plan to take WeWork global. So basically, Masa's son gave Adam Neumann a check for $4 billion and said, go crazy. And that changes everything.
Maybe talk a little bit about what this entry of Masa meant.
It changed everything. I mean, leading up to that moment, WeWork was running out of money. They didn't have places to turn for it. The company was, if they got more money, it needed to be a large amount of money. The valuation was already pretty inflated. So there weren't places to go to continue funding the growth. And Adam was resistant to an IPO at that point. He did not think the company was ready. He wanted to keep growing, and that is not the mode that you're in when you head towards an IPO. And so this moment of this meeting between Adam and Masa, two people who see themselves as visionaries, doing things in ways that others are not, and with bigger dreams and bigger visions than anyone else, was a perfectly incongruous match in that it sort of led the company down the path that I think sent it to the end, which is that any ambition Adam had that he had managed to kind of rein in up to that point, he didn't need to rein in anymore. He had as much money as he wanted to do practically anything to expand not only the office business, but to expand the other businesses that he wanted to get into, to start a gym, to open an elementary school, all of these things that kind of eventually sent the company away from what it was good at and distracted the company, I think can be traced back to this moment when suddenly Adam had all the money in the world and there really were no limitations on what he could do.
Yeah, talk about these side businesses that he expanded into.
It makes a bunch of acquisitions of other startups.
We had this idea, why don't we just invest money in companies that make impact? All the employees want to work for them. Everybody want to be part of it. And it's just going to work out in an amazing way.
I mean, there was obviously the wave pool company. And then there was the We School, which was run by Rebecca.
We grow. We're going to educate your kids better.
When my eldest daughter was in kindergarten, as we started to look around for schools in both New York and the West Coast, I wasn't finding a place that was going to nurture her spirit and her soul as much as her mind.
And one that I personally feel quite sad about was Meetups. I think it was a great company, and he managed to acquire them because he just had the money, right? And he could use the position of these founders that they wanted to move on and build something new. Talk about these side businesses a little.
Yeah, well, Meetup is an interesting one because, it made a certain amount of sense. WeWork has all this space and people use it during the day, but they don't use it at night. Meetup is a kind of place where different organizations need space. So you could make a certain argument for it, but it was also, it was an acquisition meant to achieve a goal that was set out by Adam and Masa, which was that WeWork should have millions of members. It should not just have hundreds of thousands as it had at the time. And to do that, you needed to find different ways to bring people into the WeWork network beyond just renting office space. And the idea was that, you could sort of, if Meetup was part of it and you could sell kind of even just a membership to be a part of the We community, to have access to the space, to go to events and things like that, you might be able to find a way to increase membership beyond just people who paid rent. So, that was one example. The school was another example. I think the company thought, okay, we're good at figuring out and managing how to use space in one way. So we could probably do it with a school. It's a totally different business, and thinking about it as a business, frankly, is a little problematic or can be. So, there were all these ways in which the company kind of tried to expand into these other areas that were adjacent in certain ways. The wave pool one was certainly farthest afield, but in Adam's kind of grand vision, it was, we're going to have these corporate campuses or these big retreat centers, and they'll have a wave pool. So you can reach for it, but ultimately, no matter kind of how far afield they were, they ultimately kind of distracted the company from the business of what it was good at.
Yeah, and I think it was all leading up to him really justifying these frothy valuations. And now let's talk a little bit about valuations. And I found this great chart that basically benchmarks the valuations. I think it was back in 2017. So 20 times revenue multiple versus Regus, which is this UK competitor basically doing the same for 2 decades already. And that one is trading at 1 times top line. So these valuations really got so frothy that he needed to, in many ways, justify the valuation by selling this tech story.
We're as much a co-working space as Amazon is a book-selling store. Anybody who thought that Amazon was there just to sell books just didn't understand the vision.
It became more and more clear that he was developing his own language, his own terms as a way of doing that. And we first saw this with the bond offering, where the community adjusted EBITDA made its first appearance, I think.
Basically, it was an attempt to say, we want to pretend to be profitable by ignoring these expenses.
They adjusted for things that were ridiculous to strip out and say you're profitable. So suddenly they went from a loss-making company to a profitable company.
At the S1 filing with the space as a service,
it felt more like a novel written by someone who was shrooming than an S1.
An S1 is a form you have to fill out that's a precursor to going public. It's a first introduction to your company, to the world, where you're representing that these are the facts.
Talk a little bit about getting the company ready to IPO. You're not a financial analyst, I know, but I think you've spent quite some time trying to understand these valuations.
Yeah, and the company, they a lot of people have asked, like, were the numbers fake? Was there some kind of fraud? And as far as I can tell, that's not the case. As the company moves toward an IPO, they try to do a couple of things. They tried to make the numbers look as good as they can, which is what any company does. And obviously, heading towards an IPO, you suddenly you can't just use whatever metrics you want. There are specific ones you need to offer to kind of institutional investors who are not taking risks of the same kind that Bruce Dunleavy or Bill Gurley or Jamie Dimon or anyone is. They're making bets on behalf of pension funds and individual investors. They're just going to be more conservative. And so the company tried to kind of present its numbers in a certain way, but when the numbers came out, they still just showed these enormous losses and not a clear path to becoming profitable, to becoming a kind of stable company. And I think, there's a universe in which I think investors could have been willing to stomach that. I do believe, because this was just an era and a time where growth was still king, and WeWork was showing that. You might have been able to get investors to buy in, but when you had on top of that all of the kind of craziness, all of the stuff we've just talked about these other businesses, about the focus of Adam at the company, the ways in which he had profited individually, the way in which his wife and his family members and his friends populated throughout this company, and kind of some of the stranger ways that he and others talked about the company. Elevating the world's consciousness was ultimately the mission statement, which was confusing to everyone.
First red flag was on page 1. It says, we dedicate this to the energy of we, greater than any one of us, but inside each of us. I mean, for God's sakes, they're running fucking desks.
And so I think all of these things combined were kind of what sort of led the company to, the IPO just not going how Adam or anyone else had planned.
And there were so many question marks around his person eventually. Obviously, there was the episode with him smoking weed on corporate jet.
Mm-hmm.
There were these buildings he owned and leased to the company. There was the role of Rebecca.
I cannot believe his wife is choosing his successor. It's so egregious that he would have his 20-to-1 voting shares, or I can't believe the company is paying him $6 million for the trademark to the word we and the company name.
He was buying buildings and then asking WeWork to lease those buildings from him. And then he took $700 million out of this company at the very time he was asking the public to put money in the company.
But how do you think that his sort of public perception at the point of the S1 filing added to these concerns?
I think it was huge. And I think, one thing about this company, it was big, but most people didn't know about WeWork. Most people didn't know about Adam Neumann. The company had 400,000 customers. Uber has tens of millions. Google has 1 billion, whatever the number is. So ultimately, sort of the public was finding out about Adam Neumann and the wave pool and the pot smoking and the elevating the world's consciousness all at the same time, along with the fact that this company was burning money. And so I think it was just sort of, it was so egregious to everyone, even to people who had kind of been to a WeWork and they thought it was cool, but they may not have known that it was supposedly worth $47 billion or who the founder was and what he was like. So I do think that a certain way, the press cycle around finding out who Adam was, finding out what the story of this company was a hard thing for the company to overcome, on top of the numbers, which didn't look great.
So now let's fast forward. There was recently, as you mentioned at the top of the show, the halving of the settlement for Adam Neumann. And we know that SoftBank has injected additional capital into the company to keep it afloat. Do you see any path towards profitability, towards an IPO personally, and how closely are you still following the company, or been so deep in it that you're sort of tired and want to move on to the next story?
There was a moment after I finished writing the book where I needed a break from Adam Neumann and WeWork, certainly. But I find the company fascinating. I find him fascinating. I have been following it closely and intend to. And I think WeWork will be around. I have some skepticism about their ability to kind of live up to what they're claiming still. And I think Adam will be around. I think he is not someone who's going to retire with his settlement, however large it is. He's going to take that money, and he already is investing it in a wide range of things. And I think he's someone who is going to try to be back in a big way. And I'll certainly be curious and eager to kind of find out and see how he tries to do that.
I hope he got a signed copy of you.
He hasn't asked for one yet, but if he did, I would absolutely.
Wonderful. I love it. So Reeves, what's next for you? How can people find out what you're up to next? How can they follow you and with your future journalistic work?
Well, I hope everyone will subscribe to New York Magazine. That's my home base and where this book began, and where, if there's another book in the future, it's probably going to begin with something I work on here. I just wrote a story about a venture capital funded air purifier. So the startup world is one I will continue to cover, and people can find me on social media in all the usual ways under my name. But I hope they'll continue to keep reading, and I hope anyone who hasn't picked up the book will take a look.
It's really the book of 2020, and I don't see any book in this year lining up to parallel this one. And really looking forward to this air purifier story of yours, which sounds like a Juicero story.
There's some elements of that.
I hope you do find some optimism in the startup world. There are really great, I think, jewels out there. I'm optimistic about the tech and startup world, but I think we can all be thankful for this cautionary tale of yours. And with that, I would leave you to it.
Thanks so much.